"Sir, you can't have him. That boy, he was with me." The words, a trembling whisper, sliced through the opulent air of New York's most exclusive restaurant, the Gilded Spire. They were barely audible above the civilized clinking of silverware on porcelain and the murmur of the city's elite, yet they carried the force of a shattering mirror. They came from a waitress, a girl of no more than 20, with exhaustion clinging to her like a second uniform. Her name was Luna Price, and in that moment, she had just committed career suicide. Alistair Finch, the billionaire at the center of the room, turned with the slow, deliberate motion of a predator. His smile, a carefully constructed masterpiece of philanthropy and power, did not falter. It was a smile that had graced the cover of Forbes, charmed senators, and sealed billion-dollar deals. It was not a smile accustomed to being interrupted by the help. "I beg your pardon?" His voice was smooth as aged whiskey, each syllable coated in a condescending patience. Beside him, a boy of about 10, with wide, haunted eyes and a shock of dark hair, clutched a leather-bound sketchbook to his chest. He was the centerpiece of the evening's charity gala, Alistair Finch's celebrated prodigy, Leo, the orphan plucked from obscurity and given the world. Luna's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the symphony of wealth surrounding her. She had seen that boy's face on the news, in the society pages, always with the same vacant stare. But seeing him in person, seeing the small, crescent-shaped scar just above his right eyebrow, a scar she knew intimately. It was like a ghost from a past she fought daily to forget had walked into the room wearing a tailored suit. "His name isn't Leo," Luna said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. She took a half-step forward, ignoring the scandalized gasp from Finch's dinner companions and the menacing glare of a nearby security guard. Her eyes were locked on the boy. "His name is Daniel. We lived together at St. Jude's Home for Children. I know that scar. He got it falling from the big oak tree in the yard." For the first time, a crack appeared in Alistair Finch's perfect facade. It was infinitesimal, a flicker in his steel-gray eyes, a slight tightening at the corner of his mouth. But it was there. His meticulously crafted world had been breached. The smile remained, but it was now a grotesque mask, stretched taut over a canvas of sudden, chilling dread. His face, usually tanned and confident from weekends in the Hamptons, seemed to lose its color under the soft glow of the crystal chandeliers. It went pale, the ghastly white of a long-buried secret unearthed. The room held its breath. A fork, suspended halfway to a mouth, hung in the air. Conversations died, leaving a vacuum filled only by the thumping in Luna's chest and the silent, terrifying question that now hung over the city's most powerful man. What secret from a forgotten orphanage could possibly make a king tremble on his throne? Luna Price was a connoisseur of forgotten things. She remembered the precise way the afternoon sun slanted through the grimy windows of the St. Jude's common room, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny lost souls. She remembered the names of every child who had come and gone, their small hopes and their crushing disappointments. Most of all, she remembered Daniel. He had been a whisper of a boy, arriving at the orphanage at age 5, clutching a small, hand-carved wooden bird so tightly his knuckles were white. He never spoke of where he came from, only that a bad man had brought him there. He was skittish and silent, communicating more through the furious scribbles in his sketchbook than with his voice. Luna, 2 years his senior, had taken him under her wing. She was the one who taught him how to tie his shoes, who defended him from the older bullies, who sat with him in the yard after he fell from the oak tree, holding a piece of ice wrapped in a rag to the gash above his eye. The wooden bird was his talisman, and he called it Pip. He'd told her once, in a rare moment of verbal clarity, that his real father had carved it for him, that it was supposed to fly him home one day. The day he disappeared from St. Jude's was the bleakest of Luna's young life. One moment he was sketching by the gate, the next he was gone. No note, no struggle, just an empty space where a small, broken boy used to be. The matron said he'd run away, a common occurrence. But Luna knew better. Daniel was terrified of the world beyond the orphanage walls. He wouldn't have run. He was taken. That was 10 years ago. St. Jude's had since been shut down, its records scattered, its children absorbed into the vast, indifferent foster care system. Luna had aged out, landing in a cramped Bronx apartment in a cycle of dead-end jobs. The Gilded Spire was the latest, a place so far removed from her reality, it felt like working on another planet. She'd learned to make herself invisible, a ghost who refilled water glasses and cleared plates. Her mind a fortress of memories no one else cared about. Until tonight. The Finch Foundation Gala for Underprivileged Youth was the event of the season. Luna had drawn the short straw and was assigned to the main floor. When Alistair Finch had made his grand entrance with the boy he called Leo, Luna had barely glanced up. But then Finch had guided the boy to a seat, and under the bright lights she saw it, the faint silvery arc of the scar. Her breath caught in her throat. Her tray wavered. She'd spent the next hour in a daze watching him, every small mannerism a painful echo of the past. The way he hunched over his sketchbook, the nervous habit of chewing on his lower lip. It was Daniel, older, cleaner, dressed in clothes that cost more than her yearly rent, but it was him. The decision to speak was not a decision at all. It was a primal, unstoppable force, the culmination of a decade of unresolved grief and a fierce, protective loyalty that time had not dulled. Now standing in the crosshairs of Alistair Finch's chilling gaze, that loyalty felt like a lead weight in her stomach. "Security," Finch said, his voice dangerously low. The mask of politeness had vanished, replaced by cold, hard command. "Remove this woman. She's clearly disturbed." A burly man in a black suit stepped forward, his hand clamping onto Luna's arm. The grip was like iron. "Let's go, miss." "No!" Luna cried, trying to wrench free. Her eyes pleaded with the boy. "Daniel, it's me. It's Luna. Remember Pip, the little wooden bird?" At the mention of the name, the boy's head shot up. His eyes, vacant moments before, widened with a flicker of something. Not quite recognition, but a deep, primal confusion, as if a word had been spoken in a language his soul knew but his mind had forgotten. He looked from Luna's desperate face to the towering figure of Alistair Finch, his supposed savior. Finch saw the flicker too, and it terrified him. "Get her out of here now," he snarled, the command cracking with an edge of pure panic. The guard began to drag Luna away, her worn-out work shoes scraping against the polished marble floor. The whispers in the room erupted into a cacophony of shock and speculation. Luna's eyes remained fixed on Daniel. "He stole you!" she screamed, her voice raw with anguish. "Don't let him lie to you. He's not who he says he is." Her words were swallowed by the closing of the heavy oak service doors. She was thrust into the sterile, frantic environment of the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans a deafening contrast to the frozen tableau she had just left. The restaurant manager, a man with a perpetually sweating brow named Mr. Dubois, rushed towards her, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. "Are you insane, Price?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "Do you know who that is? That's Alistair Finch. He could buy this building and have it torn down by breakfast just for the inconvenience." "He has my friend," Luna said, her own voice shaking uncontrollably. "That boy, he's my friend from the orphanage. Finch is lying." "You're fired," Dubois sputtered, pointing a sausage-like finger toward the employee exit. "Get your things. Get out. You are never to set foot in this establishment again. And if you know what's good for you, you will forget this night ever happened." Shoved out into the cold New York night, the alley smelling of garbage and rain, Luna stood shivering, not from the chill, but from the terrifying certainty of what she had just done. She had stared into the face of a monster, and the monster had stared back. He would not simply let this go. She hadn't just lost her job. She had made a powerful enemy, and deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The first 24 hours were a blur of adrenaline and fear. Luna half expected a black car to pull up alongside her as she walked home, or a knock on her flimsy apartment door in the dead of night. She packed a small bag with her few valuables, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a faded photograph of the children at St. Jude's, and her mother's silver locket, and stashed it under her bed. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's confused face, Alistair Finch's pale fury. By the third day, a different kind of fear set in, the fear of being ignored, of her desperate cry in the restaurant fading into just another piece of society gossip, a footnote in the legend of Alistair Finch. The story that did appear online was a masterclass in public relations. It painted Luna as a disturbed and unstable former employee, likely seeking money or fame, who had accosted the benevolent billionaire and his adopted son. The article quoted a source close to Finch, who expressed deep sympathy for the poor girl's delusions. They had discredited her before she could even formulate a plan. Desperation was a cold, hard stone in her stomach. The police would laugh her out of the station. Who would believe an unemployed waitress over a man who funded half the city's charities? She needed proof. She needed an ally. Her mind dredged up a name from the static of her memory. A name associated with St. Jude's that she hadn't thought of in years. Jack Callahan. He was a reporter for the New York Chronicle back then, one of the old-school shoe-leather journalists who seemed to live on coffee and righteous indignation. He had done a series on the failing foster care system, and St. Jude's had been one of his focuses. He had been kind to the kids, asking them questions with a gentle gravity that made them feel heard. He had even quoted Luna once, a fiery 10-year-old demanding better books for the orphanage library. Finding him wasn't easy. A Google search revealed he'd left the Chronicle years ago after a bitter falling out over a story his editors had killed. He'd faded from the limelight, now only occasionally publishing long-form pieces on a small independent news blog called The Public Record. It was a bare-bones website fueled by donations and a palpable sense of cynicism. Luna found an email address and wrote a message, her fingers trembling as she typed. She kept it short, mentioning St. Jude's, Alistair Finch, and the boy named Daniel. She hit send, feeling like she'd just tossed a message in a bottle into a vast, uncaring ocean. To her astonishment, a reply came less than an hour later. Where can we meet? Somewhere public. They met at a noisy diner in Hell's Kitchen, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a permanent smell of fried onions. Jack Callahan was older than she remembered, his face a roadmap of late nights and lost battles. His hair was more silver than black, and his eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses were weary but sharp. He nursed a black coffee, watching her with an unnerving stillness as she stumbled through her story. Alistair Finch, he said, his voice a gravelly baritone, when she finished. He took a slow sip of his coffee. You're picking a fight with God, kid, or at least his New York equivalent. I'm not picking a fight, Luna insisted, leaning forward. I'm trying to save my friend. I know it was him, Mr. Callahan. I'd bet my life on it. That might be the price, Jack said, his gaze unflinching. He was testing her, she realized, looking for the cracks, for the hint of delusion the papers had written about. To prove her sanity, Luna began to pour out the details she had hoarded for a decade. She described the layout of St. Jude's, from the scratch on the third-floor banister to the loose floorboard in the West Dormitory where the boys used to hide contraband candy. She described Daniel's sketchbook, filled with drawings of a recurring house, a grand place with a sprawling porch and a weeping willow in the yard. And she told him about Pip, the carved bird. He told me his real dad, a man named Michael, gave it to him, Luna said, her voice dropping. He said his dad was a genius, an inventor, and that he had a partner who stole everything. He said the bad man who took him to St. Jude's was that partner. Jack's cynical facade began to crumble. He set his coffee cup down with a soft click. An inventor named Michael? With a partner who betrayed him? He pulled a small, battered notebook and a pen from his jacket pocket. Did Daniel ever mention a last name? Luna squeezed her eyes shut, trying to pull the memory from the depths. Something with a V? Vane? Vance? Vaughn, Jack supplied, his voice suddenly tense. Michael Vaughn? Luna's eyes snapped open. Yes, that's it. Michael Vaughn. How did you know? Jack Callahan stared at her, his weary eyes suddenly alight with the fire of a long dormant hunt. Because 15 years ago, I started investigating the story of Michael Vaughn. He was a brilliant software engineer, co-founder of a tech startup called Apex Innovations. His partner was a charismatic salesman with a gift for raising capital, a young, hungry hustler named Alistair Finch. The air in the diner suddenly felt thin, electric. Vaughn was the brains, Finch was the mouth. Jack continued, scribbling furiously in his notebook. They were on the verge of a breakthrough, a revolutionary data compression algorithm. Then, tragedy struck. Michael Vaughn and his wife died in a fiery car crash on the Taconic Parkway. A terrible accident. Finch, the surviving partner, inherited the company, patented the algorithm, and built his empire on its back. He became a billionaire. Michael Vaughn became a footnote. And his son, Luna whispered, a horrifying clarity dawning on her. According to the official report, the Vaughns had no children, Jack said, his voice grim. The car was so badly burned, the records were a mess. I always had a bad feeling about it. The police report was too neat, the witnesses too vague. My editor killed the story, said I was chasing ghosts, tilting at windmills against a man who was becoming the city's darling. They told me to drop it. He looked up from his notebook, his eyes boring into Luna's. I never did. Not really. But I never had the missing piece. The key. Kid. I think you just handed it to me. He leaned back in the booth, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting a very long time for a reckoning. Finch didn't just steal a company, Jack murmured. More to himself than to her. He stole the man's son. He buried the heir and raised him as his own pet project, a trophy of his ultimate victory. It's monstrous. It's Shakespearean. He looked at Luna, his expression now one of profound respect. They called you unstable, delusional, but you, Miss Price, are the one person in this whole godforsaken city who actually remembers the truth. For the first time in days, Luna didn't feel like a powerless girl. She felt like a witness. And with Jack Callahan by her side, she might just have found a weapon. Their investigation began in the shadows. Jack, with his old contacts and a reporter's innate distrust of official narratives, started digging into the cold case of the Vaughn car crash. Luna, with her flawless memory, became his living archive, providing the human details that documents could never capture. Their first stop was the city archives, a cavernous, dusty building that smelled of decaying paper. They were looking for the intake records from St. Jude's, hoping to find any mention of a Daniel arriving around the time of the crash. It was a long shot. Records from defunct institutions were often lost or destroyed. While Jack charmed and cajoled a weary clerk, Luna's sharp eyes scanned the shelves. She noticed a series of mislabeled boxes tucked away in a dark corner, marked with the name of a different, long-closed facility. Something about the handwriting on the label pricked at her memory. It was the same looping, ornate script of Sister Agnes, the head mistress of St. Jude's. On a hunch, Luna pointed it out to Jack. Inside, beneath layers of moldering paperwork, they found it. A thin file for a Daniel Doe. No last name. Date of admission was 2 days after the Vaughn car crash. The admitting party was listed as a state-appointed guardian. There was no name, only a signature. The signature was a flamboyant, arrogant scrawl. An A followed by a sweeping F. Alistair Finch. He brought him there himself, Jack breathed, snapping a picture of the page with his phone. Bold, arrogant. He was a nobody then. He must have figured no one would ever check. Their next break came from an unexpected source. Luna remembered that Daniel often drew one thing besides the house with the weeping willow, a woman's face, a kind face with laugh lines around her eyes. He had called her Anna. She was his nanny. Jack's deep dive into the Vaughn's personal life eventually led them to an address in Queens. They found Anna Petrova living in a small, tidy apartment above a bakery. She was an elderly woman now, with a warm smile that was instantly recognizable from Daniel's drawings. At first she was wary, her eyes filled with an old sadness. But when Luna described the wooden bird, Pip, Anna's composure broke. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks as she recounted the story. Michael, Mr. Vaughn, he was a good man, so brilliant, but he trusted the wrong person. He trusted Finch. She told them that in the weeks before the crash, Michael had discovered Finch was embezzling money and planning to steal the patent for the algorithm. He had confronted Finch, threatening to go to the authorities. The night of the crash, Anna said, her voice a choked whisper, Michael called me. He was frantic. He said, he's going to do something terrible, Anna. Take Daniel. Take him and run. Don't trust anyone. He made me promise to hide him. Anna had packed a bag for herself and the boy, but she was too late. When she arrived at the Vaughn's sprawling home in Westchester, the house was dark. A black car was pulling away. She caught a glimpse of Finch in the passenger seat, and in the back she saw the silhouette of a small boy. She had gone to the police, but they didn't believe her. She was a nanny with a story about a powerful man. Finch had already spun the narrative of the tragic accident. Her story was dismissed as the hysterical grief of an employee. Defeated and terrified, she had disappeared, living in fear for years. "I failed him," Anna wept. "I failed my sweet boy." "No," Luna said, taking the old woman's hand. "You survived, and you remembered. Now we can help him." As Jack and Luna were building their case, Alistair Finch was tightening his net. Luna was evicted from her apartment on a flimsy pretext. Her bank account was frozen due to a sudden, inexplicable fraud investigation. She was being systematically erased, pushed further and further to the margins. She moved into a spare room in Jack's cramped apartment, the walls lined with books and old case files. One evening, as Jack was out chasing a lead, Luna was alone in the apartment. There was a sharp knock at the door. Her heart leaped into her throat. Peeking through the peephole, she saw two men in dark suits. They didn't look like salesmen. She didn't answer. They knocked again, harder this time. "Ms. Price," a calm voice said through the door. "We know you're in there. Mr. Finch would like to have a word. He's a reasonable man. He's prepared to be very generous." Luna backed away from the door, her body trembling. This wasn't about generosity. It was a threat wrapped in the language of money. "He knows where I am," she whispered to herself. The fear was a cold, metallic taste in her mouth. They weren't just discrediting her anymore. They were closing in. When Jack returned, he found her huddled in a chair, pale and shaken. After she told him what happened, he locked the door and drew the blinds. For the first time, he looked truly worried. "He's getting nervous," Jack said. "That means we're close. But it also means he's getting dangerous. We have one shot at this, Luna. We can't just leak the story. His lawyers will bury it in lawsuits and injunctions. He'll paint us as conspiracy theorists. We need to do something he can't control. We need a public spectacle. We need to force his hand in front of the world." He looked at a calendar on his wall, an invitation tacked to it for a press event. His eyes narrowed. The Future Leaders Foundation is hosting its annual awards ceremony next week. Guess who the keynote speaker and man of the hour is? Alistair Finch, and he would be officially presenting his son and heir, Leo, with the foundation's first ever Youth Visionary Award. "It's the perfect stage," Jack said, a plan forming in his eyes. "He'll be surrounded by the media, by the city's most influential people. He'll be trapped in his own spotlight. That's where we'll confront him." "How?" Luna asked, her voice small. "They'll never let me in the door." Jack's grim smile returned. "They won't have to," he said, tapping a press pass clipped to his bulletin board. "But they will let me in. And you, my friend, are going to be my secret weapon." The night of the Future Leaders Foundation Awards ceremony felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers, champagne flutes, and the self-satisfied hum of the powerful. Luna, dressed in a simple black catering uniform Jack had procured, felt more invisible than ever. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. Her job was simple: blend in, stay near the stage, and wait for Jack's signal. Jack himself was working the room, a grizzled shark swimming among the glittering fish. His press pass his shield. He'd planted a tiny microphone on Luna's collar, connected to a small broadcasting device in his bag that would feed audio directly to his blog's live stream. It was a desperate 21st century guerrilla tactic. The ceremony began, speeches were made, awards were given. Finally, the moment of silence. Not the polite, expectant hush between musical movements, but a hard, absolute vacuum. It descended upon the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel with the weight of a collapsing star, sucking the air from 1,000 lungs. In its epicenter stood a girl in a borrowed catering uniform, and a boy whose world was fracturing, atom by atom, under the glare of the stage lights. Alistair Finch's face, a moment ago a portrait of benevolent power, was now a canvas of slack-jawed horror. The name, Daniel Vaughn, had not been spoken aloud. It had been invoked, a spell cast from a forgotten time, and it had broken him. The podium microphone, a marvel of modern engineering, captured every nuance of his reaction. The sharp, involuntary intake of breath, the wet click in his throat, and the whispered, venomous curse that followed. You! The word was a puff of poison. It should have been lost in the cavernous room, but in that profound silence, it boomed like a judgment. Luna met his gaze, the terror that had been a cold stone in her gut transmuting into something else, something forged in the fires of a decade's worth of righteous grief. "Yes, me," she said, her voice carried by the tiny microphone clipped to her collar, reaching every corner of the room, every live-streaming phone, every news camera that was now swiveling toward her with predatory speed. "My name is Luna Price. 10 years ago, Daniel and I lived at St. Jude's Home for Children. But he wasn't an orphan." She ascended the stage steps, not as an intruder, but as a claimant. Each step was a measured reclamation of a stolen history. The room was a blur of gaping mouths and flashing lights, but her entire universe had narrowed to the two figures before her, the monster and his victim. "He was the son of Michael and Eleanor Vaughn," she declared, her voice resonating with a certainty that could not be faked. "Michael Vaughn was Alistair Finch's partner, the soul of Apex Innovations, the genius Mr. Finch erased from history after he betrayed him." A collective gasp, sharp and sibilant, swept through the audience. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality being torn to shreds. This was no longer a charity gala. It was a tribunal. The spell of Finch's shock shattered, replaced by a volcanic surge of pure rage. The mask of the philanthropist fell away, revealing the cornered animal beneath. "Lies!" he roared, his voice cracking. "She's insane, a disgruntled employee I had fired for stalking my son." He lunged not at Luna, but towards Daniel, his hand reaching to clamp down on the boy's shoulder, to reassert ownership. But Daniel, in a moment of pure, startling instinct, took a half-step back, pulling himself out of Finch's reach. At the same time, he stepped almost imperceptibly sideways, placing himself partially between Finch and Luna. It was not a conscious act of defense, but a primal realignment of loyalties, his body moving before his shattered mind could comprehend why. "Sir," Daniel stammered, his eyes wide with a terrifying confusion, the world tilting violently on its axis. Finch's face purpled. "Stay out of this, Leo," he snarled, the name Leo now sounding like a curse, an incantation to force the boy back into the box he had built for him. Luna ignored the bellowing tycoon. Her focus was absolute. Her gaze held Daniel's, a lifeline thrown across a chasm of lost years. "He's been lying to you your whole life, Daniel. But you know the truth. It's in you. Remember your father. He didn't work in an office. He worked in a workshop behind the house. It smelled of sawdust and welding flux. He had calluses on his hands. He carved you a bird from a piece of willow wood he saved from the big tree in the yard. He called it Pip." Each word was a key turning a rusted lock. Daniel flinched, his hand flying to his chest as if he could feel the ghost of the bird there. The heavy crystal award for youth visionary slipped from his other hand. It hit the polished stage with a deafening, percussive crack, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. A metaphor so perfect it felt scripted. Pip. The name was a ghost on his lips, a foreign word in a native tongue he had forgotten he knew. His carefully constructed world of tutors, galas, and the sterile opulence of Finch's penthouse was dissolving like sugar in water, replaced by flashes of sunlight through leaves, the scent of wood shavings, the feel of a rough, loving hand. "Security! Get this lunatic off my stage!" Finch screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He was no longer a captain of industry. He was a common thug, his power evaporating under the hot lights. Uniformed guards surged toward the stage from both wings, but Jack Callahan, a grim sentinel in the aisle, had already uploaded the first 30 seconds of the live stream. The truth was out. It could not be recalled. Luna pressed on, her voice a desperate, emotional clarion call against the rising tide of chaos. And your mother, Daniel, remember your mother. She played the piano after you went to bed. Chopin, every single night. Her study smelled of lavender and old books. She didn't call you Leo. She called you her little star, her zvezdochka. That final word, a whispered Russian endearment, was the final blow. Daniel staggered back as if physically struck, a low, wounded moan tearing from his throat. The fragments became a flood, a woman's gentle hands guiding his on the piano keys, a man's deep laugh in a sun-drenched workshop, a feeling of absolute unconditional love, and then something else, a dark car, shouting. The face of the bad man from his deepest nightmares, the man who took him away, was suddenly, sickeningly clear. He stared at Alistair Finch, but he was no longer seeing his benefactor, his savior. He was seeing the architect of his deepest trauma. "You!" Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse with dawning horror. He raised a trembling hand, his finger pointing directly at the billionaire. "You were in the house. You were in the dark car." It was the death blow. Alistair Finch, the titan, the philanthropist, the king of New York, stood defeated on a stage of his own making, his empire, his legacy, his very identity shattering around him like the crystal award at his feet. His face went beyond anger, beyond fear, into a state of utter, pathetic ruin. He was a ghost, haunted and exposed by the children he had tried to erase. As security finally swarmed the stage, creating a chaotic human barrier, Luna's eyes met Daniel's, and for the first time in a decade, she did not see the vacant stare of a lost boy named Leo. She saw the soul of Daniel Vaughn, terrified and broken, but present. He was looking at her, a flicker of recognition, of anchor in the hurricane that had just become his life. Before a guard could pull her away, she saw his hand reach for her, a small, desperate gesture of a drowning boy finding his only raft. In the aisle, Jack Callahan lowered his phone, the live stream still running, a small, grim smile touching his lips. It was not a smile of victory, but of grim satisfaction. The court of public opinion had just heard the opening statement, and the verdict was already in. The hours that followed were a disorienting fever dream. The opulent ballroom became a crime scene, the champagne-sipping elite replaced by grim-faced NYPD detectives. Flashbulbs strobed with the intensity of a lightning storm, their relentless clicks forming a chaotic soundtrack to the implosion of a dynasty. Luna found herself in a sterile interrogation room, the adrenaline that had fueled her courage giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. She recounted the story over and over, the names and places of St. Jude's, once her private, hoarded memories, now official evidence in the crime of the century. Jack was her rock, a gruff, immovable presence who handled the clamoring press, shielded her from the most intrusive questions, and ensured she had a cup of scaldingly hot, sweet tea in her trembling hands at all times. But her mind was on Daniel. He had been whisked away by Child Protective Services and detectives, a pale, silent figure swallowed by the system. The image of his hand reaching for her was seared into her memory. Had she saved him, or had she merely thrown him from one prison into another, the prison of a past so horrific his own mind had chosen to forget it? The weight of that question was heavier than any threat Finch could ever make. It was nearly dawn when they were finally released. Jack drove her not to her now compromised apartment, but to his own, a cramped space in the West Village that smelled of old books, black coffee, and righteous indignation. He pointed to a couch with a worn Afghan thrown over it. "Home for now," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Sleep did not come. She lay on the couch, listening to the sounds of the city waking up, and stared at the ceiling. She had won. The truth was out. So why did it feel less like a victory and more like the beginning of an entirely new war? The first battle was for Daniel. Finch's lawyers, a squadron of the most expensive legal predators in the city, descended immediately, arguing that Leo was a deeply disturbed boy who had been manipulated by a vengeful ex-employee and a disgraced journalist. They fought to keep him isolated, to control the narrative. But Jack Callahan had been preparing for this war for 15 years. He, along with a pro bono legal team from a firm Finch had once tried to destroy, fought back with everything they had. They presented the St. Jude's intake form. They flew Anna Petrova in from Queens, a woman whose quiet, tearful testimony about her sweet boy Daniel and the frantic final phone call from his father was so powerful it silenced the courtroom. Luna's turn on the witness stand was grueling. Finch's lead attorney, a man with a reptilian smile, tried to paint her as delusional, obsessed, a fantasist seeking her 15 minutes of fame. He picked at her past, her poverty, her string of menial jobs. "So, Miss Price," he'd sneered, "you expect this court to believe that you, a waitress, remembered a single scar on a boy you hadn't seen in 10 years? And from that, you unraveled a conspiracy that has eluded law enforcement for over a decade?" Luna looked not at him, but at the jury. "I don't expect you to understand," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "When you grow up in a place like St. Jude's, the other children aren't just friends. They are your arms and your legs. They are the only family you have. You don't forget your family. You don't forget the curve of a scar you helped clean and bandage. You don't forget the sound of their nightmares. I didn't unravel a conspiracy. I just remembered my brother." The words hung in the air, simple, pure, and unbreakable. The lawyer had no response. The true turning point, however, was Daniel himself. His journey back from the fog was not a miracle of sudden recollection. It was a brutal, painstaking excavation. In quiet sessions with a court-appointed therapist, a kind woman with gentle eyes, he began to sketch. At first, the pages of his new sketchbook were filled with the familiar, sterile images of his life as Leo. The penthouse apartment, the abstract sculptures Finch collected, the view of Central Park from a high window. Then one day, a new shape emerged. A tree, a weeping willow, its branches heavy and sad. For days he drew nothing but the tree, from every angle, in every season. Then a house appeared behind it, and then a face. A woman with laugh lines around her eyes. A man with a smudge of grease on his cheek. He drew them without understanding who they were, his hand moving with a memory that his conscious mind had not yet accessed. The therapist asked him about the wooden bird, Pip. He flinched, then obsessively began to sketch it, filling an entire book with its image. He drew it perched on the willow branch. He drew it in a man's calloused hand. He drew it flying towards a star. The breakthrough came during a session with Luna. They were sitting in a quiet room, a window overlooking a small garden. He hadn't spoken more than a few words to her since that night, his trauma a thick wall of glass between them. He was showing her his drawings of the house when his hand stilled. He pointed to a small, lopsided structure in the branches of the willow tree. "A tree house," he whispered, his own voice sounding strange to him. My father, he was building it for me, for my birthday." He looked up at Luna, his eyes for the first time clear and filled with a devastating grief. "I remember. He promised he'd finish it." He began to cry then, not the confused whimper of a lost boy, but the deep, wrenching sobs of a son mourning a father he had just rediscovered. Luna moved to his side and held him, her own tears falling freely, her heart breaking and swelling all at once. The ghost of Leo Finch had finally faded. Daniel Vaughn had come home. His testimony, delivered in a quiet, steady voice, was the final, unassailable truth. He did not speak with anger, but with a profound, chilling sadness, recounting the memories as they had returned to him. He remembered the love, he remembered the fear, and he remembered the man who had stolen it all. Alistair Finch's conviction was a global event. Stripped of his bespoke suits and his army of handlers, he looked small and petty in the defendant's box. When the guilty verdict was read on all counts, kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy to conceal a crime, and a dozen others, he did not collapse. He straightened his tie, a sneer twisting his lips, and leveled a look of pure, unadulterated hatred at Luna, Jack, and Daniel. It was not the look of a ruined man, but of a monster promising a haunting. He would die in prison, but his evil, they knew, would not die with him. The Finch empire was dismantled, its assets seized. A significant portion, recognized as the stolen intellectual property of Michael Vaughn, was placed into a trust for his sole surviving heir. Daniel Vaughn was overnight one of the wealthiest young men in the world. But wealth was an abstraction. Reality was the small, unlikely family that formed in the aftermath. It was Anna Petrova's apartment, filled with the scent of baking bread, where she would hold Daniel's face in her hands and weep, telling him stories of the brilliant, kind man his father was and the fiercely intelligent woman his mother had been. It was Jack Callahan's cluttered living room, where he and Daniel would sit in comfortable silence, Jack typing away at his now world-famous blog, Daniel sketching the city outside the window, his art no longer a fearful retreat, but a confident exploration. And most of all, it was Luna. The foundation created from the Vaughn Trust's first act was to quietly offer her a full, unconditional scholarship to any university in the world. She chose Columbia to study social work. She turned down every interview, every book deal, every offer of fame. Her purpose had not been to become a hero. It had been to find her friend. They found their new normal in the small moments, in arguments over pizza toppings, in walks through the park where Daniel, for the first time, sketched the faces of laughing children instead of empty landscapes. Luna taught him how to navigate the subway, how to cook something other than toast. He, in turn, with the benefit of a decade of elite tutoring, helped her with her calculus homework. They were piecing together a life from the fragments of two broken childhoods. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year to the day after the world had broken open, Luna and Daniel stood before two simple granite headstones in a quiet Westchester cemetery. The autumn leaves were a riot of red and gold. It was their first visit. Daniel knelt. He gently placed a bouquet of lavender on the grave marked Eleanor Vaughn. Then, on the stone marked Michael Vaughn, he set down a small object. It was a bird carved from a piece of pale willow wood. It was not Pip. The original was long lost to time. This one was new, whittled with his own hands over many weeks, the knife strokes tentative at first, then growing in confidence. It was his own creation. He didn't speak for a long time, simply tracing the letters of his parents' names with his fingertips. "I remember the piano," he said softly. His voice carried on the cool breeze. "She was teaching me a nocturne. I can still feel where my fingers are supposed to go." He looked at his father's name. "He used to let me help in the workshop. He said I had an engineer's hands." He stood up and turned to Luna, his eyes clear and sad, but not broken. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "He would have liked you, Luna. He always rooted for the ones with too much fight in them." Tears pricked Luna's eyes, tears of sorrow for the man she never knew, and of profound relief for the boy standing before her. "He'd be so proud of the man you're becoming, Daniel," she whispered, her hand finding his. They stood there as the sun dipped lower, casting long, peaceful shadows. The scars were there. They would always be there, pale, silvery lines on their souls. Finch had stolen a decade from Daniel and a childhood of peace from Luna. He had broken them in ways that could never be fully mended, but he had not destroyed them. Here, in the quiet dignity of this place, they were not victims. They were survivors. They were the sum of a loyalty that had crossed a decade, a truth that had toppled an empire, and a bond forged not in blood, but in the shared memory of a dusty orphanage room. Finally, Daniel squeezed her hand. "Are you hungry?" he asked. The question was so simple, so wonderfully mundane. It was the most beautiful thing Luna had ever heard. "Starving," she said, a real smile breaking through her tears. "I was thinking Thai." "I hate Thai," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching upwards. "Pizza." "Fine," she laughed, "but I get to pick the toppings." Hand in hand, they walked away from the graves, their quiet argument about mushrooms and pepperoni, a gentle living prayer against the silence. They left the past to rest, its ghost finally at peace, and stepped out of the long shadows, not into a blinding, heroic light, but into the simple, complicated, and exquisitely ordinary promise of a life that was finally their own.